The courtroom was alive with a hushed intensity, the kind that settled over a place where history was waiting to be written. Marble columns loomed high above the spectators, and the polished wooden benches reflected the golden light that streamed through the tall windows. At the heart of it all, LeBron James stood at the defense table, his imposing frame clad in a navy blue suit tailored to perfection. Today, he was not just an athlete, not just a champion of the game. He was a man determined to defend his integrity in a place where words, not points, carried the day. Across from him, Judge Sonia Sotomayor adjusted her glasses and regarded him with a calm, penetrating gaze. "Mr. James," she began, her voice firm and authoritative, "you are known for your athletic achievements, but today you stand in a very different arena. Do you understand the gravity of the questions before you?" LeBron's deep brown eyes met hers without a flicker of hesitation. "Yes, Your Honor," he said, his voice even and measured. "I understand that this is not a game, and I'm here to prove that my commitment to truth and justice is as strong as my commitment on the court." A murmur rippled through the spectators, but Judge Sotomayor remained composed. She leaned back slightly in her chair, studying the man before her. "Very well," she said, "then let us proceed." The room was packed. Reporters jostled for the best view, and legal scholars scribbled notes in the margins of their yellow legal pads. But LeBron seemed oblivious to the swirl of activity around him. He focused on the judge, on the questions that would come, on the chance to tell his story in his own words. The case had begun as a defamation lawsuit brought by a powerful sports executive who claimed that LeBron had defamed him in a widely shared interview. The executive had accused LeBron of recklessly tarnishing his reputation, of using his influence to destroy a man's livelihood. But LeBron had insisted that what he said was the truth. Hard truth, perhaps, but truth nonetheless. As the trial opened, the executive's lawyer took the floor, a silver-haired man with a voice like gravel and a talent for making even the simplest questions sound like a trap. "Mr. James," he began, his tone dripping with condescension, "you understand that in this courtroom, your celebrity means nothing. Only the facts matter." LeBron met the lawyer's gaze squarely. "I know," he said. "That's why I'm here, to lay out the facts." The lawyer smirked. "Then let us begin." He launched into a series of questions designed to corner LeBron, to force him to stumble or contradict himself. But LeBron, who had spent nights poring over legal briefs and discussing strategy with his attorneys, was ready. Each answer he gave was calm, measured, and grounded in the truth he had lived. He spoke of the young athletes who had come to him, their voices shaking with stories of betrayal and corruption within the sports world. He described the quiet conversations that had taken place in locker rooms and training facilities, the things whispered in the shadows that no one else dared to say out loud, and he spoke of his own conscience, of the sleepless nights when he wondered if he should stay silent or speak out. Judge Sotomayor listened closely, her expression unreadable, but her eyes intent. She asked questions, sharp, insightful questions that cut through the noise of the courtroom like a blade. "Mr. James," she said at one point, "you are not an attorney, and yet you speak with conviction about the rights of others. Why?" LeBron didn't hesitate. "Because I've lived it, Your Honor," he said. "I know what it means to have power and what it means to stand up for those without it. And I know that in this courtroom, the truth is the only thing that matters." The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of his words settling over the gathered crowd like a heavy curtain. Even the reporters, always quick to scribble the latest soundbite, paused for a beat. As the day wore on, the lawyer pressed harder, his questions growing sharper, more pointed. But LeBron held his ground. He spoke of accountability, of the duty he felt to use his platform to amplify voices too often ignored. He did not waver, even when the lawyer's questions turned personal, when they probed his motives, his character, his very soul. In the final moments of the day, Judge Sotomayor leaned forward, her gaze steady. "Mr. James," she said, her voice quiet but commanding, "tomorrow you will have the chance to present your own witnesses, Make sure they are ready. This court will hear every side before it decides where the truth lies." LeBron nodded, a flicker of determination in his eyes. "They're ready, Your Honor," he said, "and so am I." As the gavel fell and the courtroom began to empty, LeBron James remained standing at the defense table for a moment longer. He took a slow breath, feeling the weight of the day's questions and the promise of the day to come. Outside, the cameras were waiting, the headlines already being written. But inside, in the quiet that followed the gavel's final echo, he found a moment of calm resolve. This was not the end. It was only the beginning. And LeBron James was ready to face whatever came next. The second day of the trial began with a crackle of anticipation in the air. The courtroom doors swung open, and the crowd surged forward, each person wanting to catch a glimpse of LeBron James as he took his seat at the defense table. He moved with calm purpose, his shoulders squared and his chin lifted, every inch the champion he was known to be. But today his arena was the courtroom, not the basketball court. Judge Sonia Sotomayor entered, her black robe flowing behind her. She wasted no time in calling the court to order. "Mr. James," she said, her voice calm but laced with authority, "today the burden shifts. You have spoken of your truth. Now you must present the voices who can speak to that truth." LeBron rose, a file of meticulously organized notes in his hands. "Your Honor, I have assembled witnesses whose stories are at the heart of why I spoke out," he said. "They are the ones who know the consequences of silence." The first witness was a young athlete, no more than 23, who took the stand with a nervous glance at the rows of spectators. He told a story of promises made and broken, of a system that lifted him up and then turned its back when he was no longer useful. His words faltered at times, but each sentence rang with the clarity of someone who had nothing left to lose. LeBron watched him closely, his own face a mask of calm focus. This was why he had spoken out, to shine a light on stories like this one, to make sure they could not be ignored. Judge Sotomayor listened intently, her questions probing but fair. "Young man," she said gently, "you understand that your testimony carries great weight. Do you stand by every word?" The witness nodded, his voice shaking. "I do, Your Honor, because if I don't speak now, when will I ever?" One by one, LeBron called more witnesses. A coach who had seen too much and could no longer remain silent. A medical trainer who spoke of injuries hidden and players pressured to perform. Each added a layer to the portrait LeBron was painting, a system built on silence and complicity, where speaking out was seen as betrayal. The executive's lawyer was relentless in his cross-examinations. He tried to poke holes in their stories, to suggest ulterior motives and personal vendettas. But the witnesses, though shaken at times, held firm. And through it all, LeBron remained a steady presence at the defense table, his eyes locked on each person who spoke. During a brief recess, LeBron stepped outside the courtroom to gather his thoughts. The sun was high overhead, but the weight of the day pressed down on him. Reporters clustered near the steps, their cameras ready, their questions sharp. But he ignored them, his focus inward. He thought of his own journey from a kid who played ball on cracked concrete courts to a man who had seen how power could be used to silence those without it. He had never wanted to be in this position, but now that he was here, he would not back down. Back in the courtroom, the final witness of the day took the stand. An old friend of LeBron's from his earliest days on the court. He spoke of LeBron's unwavering loyalty, of the times he had seen him stand up for those who couldn't stand for themselves. His voice was quiet, but his words carried the weight of years. "LeBron has always believed that the truth matters," he said simply, "even when it costs him." Judge Sotomayor nodded, a thoughtful expression on her face. She looked at LeBron, and in her eyes there was a flicker of understanding, of respect. As the court adjourned for the day, LeBron sat for a moment in the emptying room, his mind racing with the stories he had heard and the questions that still lay ahead. Outside, the world watched. But in here, in this room of marble and wood, he had found something stronger than any spotlight. the power of truth and the courage to stand by it. The third day of the trial dawned with a heavy stillness. Outside, the city bustled as usual, but inside the courtroom, a different kind of intensity gripped the air. LeBron James arrived early, taking his seat at the defense table and laying out his notes with quiet precision. He wore a dark charcoal suit today, the color reflecting the gravity of what lay ahead. Judge Sonia Sotomayor entered promptly, her black robe moving like a shadow as she settled onto the bench. "Mr. James," she said, her voice steady and firm, "you have presented witnesses who spoke to the truth as they saw it. Today you will be questioned on the heart of your own words. Do you understand?" LeBron nodded, his face set in calm determination. "Yes, Your Honor," he replied. "I'm ready." The executive's lawyer wasted no time. He rose from his chair, his expression sharp and focused. "Mr. James," he began, "you are not a lawyer. You are an athlete. Why should this court believe that you understand the responsibility that comes with making serious accusations?" LeBron's gaze didn't waver. "Because, sir," he said quietly, "I know what it means to have people depend on you. I know that words carry weight and I don't use them carelessly." The lawyer pressed on, his tone turning sharper. "But these words you spoke, these claims, they've damaged a man's reputation. They've cost him business, respect, and trust. Do you not see the harm you have caused?" LeBron took a deep breath. "I do see it, but I also see the harm that comes from ignoring the truth. The people I spoke about, their lives matter, their safety matters. If that truth costs someone their reputation, then perhaps that's a price that needed to be paid." A hush fell over the courtroom at his words. Even Judge Sotomayor's usually impassive face showed a flicker of surprise, of interest. The lawyer's mouth twisted into a thin line. "So you admit you were willing to sacrifice a man's reputation to make a point?" "No," LeBron said firmly. "I didn't speak to make a point. I spoke to make a change." The lawyer paced in front of the jury box, his steps measured and deliberate. "And yet, you stand here today, accused of defamation. Doesn't that trouble you?" "Of course it does," LeBron answered, his voice steady. "But what troubles me more is the idea of staying silent when I know the truth." Judge Sotomayor leaned forward, her eyes on LeBron. "Mr. James," she said, her tone thoughtful, "the law is meant to protect both the speaker and the spoken of. Do you believe you found that balance?" LeBron met her gaze directly. "I believe I did, Your Honor, because I spoke not from anger, not from spite, but from a place of responsibility. And I did everything in my power to ensure what I said was true." As the morning turned to afternoon, the questions continued, each one designed to test LeBron's resolve, to probe for any sign of weakness or doubt. But he remained composed, his answers measured and sincere. Outside the courthouse, the media frenzy continued. Headlines screamed of scandal and controversy, but inside, the real battle was one of conscience, a clash between power and principle. When court recessed for the evening, LeBron stood alone for a moment in the silent courtroom. He looked around the wood-paneled walls, the empty chairs, the judge's bench that had seen decades of human drama. He thought of the people who had trusted him with their stories, their fears, their hopes, and he felt the weight of that trust settle over him once more. Tomorrow he knew would bring new challenges, but for tonight, he allowed himself a moment of quiet pride, not in himself, but in the courage of those who had spoken out, and in the hope that maybe, just maybe, their words would be enough to tip the scales of justice. The fourth day of the trial dawned with a stormy sky outside and a different kind of storm brewing within the courthouse. As LeBron James took his seat, his face was a study in determination. He knew today was critical, the day his defense would be tested like never before. Judge Sonia Sotomayor entered with her usual quiet command, her eyes sweeping the room with an air of gravitas. "Mr. James," she said, "you have given this court much to consider. Today we will hear from the other side." The executive's lawyer rose, his steps deliberate as he approached the lectern. "Your Honor, we intend to show that Mr. James acted recklessly. that he used his platform not to inform, but to inflame. His voice was smooth, his confidence evident. We will show that he chose to speak without considering the consequences. Witness after witness took the stand, each one called to cast doubt on LeBron's credibility. A former colleague who painted him as impulsive, a rival sports commentator who suggested he was more interested in headlines than justice. Their words were sharp, their testimony calculated to erode the foundation LeBron had worked so hard to build, but through it all, LeBron remained calm. He listened intently, his hands folded on the table in front of him, his expression impassive. He knew this was the cost of speaking out, that there would always be those who would try to tear you down. During a brief recess, LeBron stepped outside the courtroom for a breath of fresh air. The sky was heavy with clouds, the air electric with the threat of rain. A reporter approached, microphone in hand, but he shook his head, offering no comment. This was not a moment for sound bites. This was a moment for resolve. Back inside, Judge Sotomayor's questions were as incisive as ever. "Mr. James," she said at one point, "the witnesses have raised concerns about your motives. What do you say to that?" LeBron stood, his voice low but unwavering. "Your Honor, I understand that speaking the truth can make people uncomfortable, but I didn't do this for comfort. I did it for accountability, for the young athletes who are told to stay quiet, for the families who have been hurt by a system that puts profit above people." The room fell silent at his words. Even the executive's lawyer seemed to pause, his next question momentarily forgotten. As the afternoon wore on, the lawyer resumed his attack, trying to paint LeBron's actions as reckless, his motives as self-serving, but LeBron answered each question with the same quiet certainty that had carried him this far. By the time the day drew to a close, the courtroom was filled with a heavy, contemplative silence. Judge Sotomayor adjourned for the evening, her gavel falling with a finality that echoed in the marble walls. LeBron remained seated for a moment, his thoughts a quiet storm within him. He knew tomorrow would be the final day, the last chance to set the record straight. But he was ready, because for him, this had never been about winning or losing. It had always been about the truth and the strength it took to stand by it. The fifth and final day of the trial arrived with a palpable sense of anticipation. The courtroom was filled to capacity, every seat occupied, every breath held. LeBron James sat at the defense table, his shoulders straight, his gaze steady. He knew that today the questions would end and the judgment would begin. Judge Sonia Sotomayor entered, her robe flowing like a river of black silk, her expression grave. "Mr. James," she said, "you have spoken of truth, of duty, of courage. Now, in your own words, tell this court why you chose to speak when you could have stayed silent." LeBron rose slowly, his hands resting lightly on the edge of the table. "Your Honor," he began, his voice clear and strong, "I spoke because I couldn't stay silent any longer, because every time someone is told to keep quiet, the truth grows weaker. And I couldn't let that happen." He paused, taking in the weight of the moment. "I know that I am not a lawyer, not a politician, not someone trained in the language of the law, but I am someone who has seen how silence can destroy, and how truth, spoken plainly and without fear, can heal." He spoke of the athletes who had come to him, of the families who had been torn apart by a system that cared more for profit than people. He spoke of his own journey, of the courts he had played on, the teammates he had stood beside, and the lessons he had learned about loyalty and justice. "Your Honor," he concluded, "I did not speak to hurt anyone. I spoke to protect those who cannot protect themselves. I spoke because I believe that the truth matters and that it always will." Judge Sotomayor listened in silence, her expression unreadable. She thanked him for his words and turned to the executive's lawyer. "You may present your closing argument," she said. The lawyer rose, his voice calm but cold. He spoke of recklessness, of responsibility, of the damage done to a man's name. But even as he spoke, there was a sense that the tide had turned, that the weight of the testimony, The quiet power of LeBron's words had left a mark that could not be erased. When the final words were spoken, Judge Sotomayor called for a recess. The room emptied slowly, reporters hurrying to file their stories, spectators murmuring in hushed tones. LeBron remained seated, his hands folded in front of him, his eyes fixed on the wooden bench where judgment would be rendered. When the court reconvened, Judge Sotomayor's voice was steady, her words measured. "This court finds," she said, "that Mr. James spoke with care, with conviction, and with respect for the truth. His words were not reckless, but a reflection of a duty to those who have no voice." A collective sigh swept the courtroom. LeBron closed his eyes for a moment, the weight of the past days lifting from his shoulders. As he stood to leave, he paused, turning back to the room that had been both battlefield and sanctuary. Outside, the world waited to hear the verdict, but inside, he knew the truth had been spoken, and that was victory enough. Disclaimer: this story is fictional and intended for entertainment purposes only.